Hello and welcome to the Bearfoot Miniatures channel, where today we're going to be going over Legions Imperialis, the Solar Auxilia. Now, Solar Auxilia as a faction, I would say are very good right now. Like, Marines don't have all of their options, this being just after the first wave of releases. Like, that may change, but I can't see it with the tanks being very solid. Their flyers are very scary, and their infantry, I would say, is on a par with Marine infantry, if not slightly better in some ways. And yeah, I think they're in a very strong position, definitely an army that's worth looking at, especially in this scale of the game, where you can really demonstrate the massed warfare of the Horus Heresy. So let's get into their formations. Now, the Solar Auxilia subcohort, this is going to be the bread and butter, right? It's the main access to your the main access to your infantry, in fact. It's enforced to take las rifle sections for your core detachments. Now, that's by no means a downside. They're cheap, they're plentiful, and they're very strong when in a building. They're just as hard to move as a Marine infantry unit. So it's not really a downside. Now, there's no upsides for this cohort. It's just got a lot of options that's very varied. It's something where if you fill out a tank company, well, I'd just throw in another sub-cohort, and there's 2 more battle tanks in this cohort as an optional detachment, and then one of detachments, which is really, really good. Like, it's just full of options. So, and there's not much to say in it. I'm trying to almost find things to say in this, but there's not much now because it is very good. Then we've got the Solar Auxilia Armoured Company, which is 2 battle tanks and a heavy armour, which will be Lehman Russ's Malcadors for the battle tanks, and the heavy armour at the moment is a Baneblade, all of which are solid. They've got access to a tank commander upgrade for plus 10 points, and what that does is give a bubble of leadership like the legate, the Lord Marshal formations and tactical commands, so that your tanks can do more specialised orders like first fire. You've then, for the optional detachments, more battle tanks, and then the one of the following. Really, you're going to be using this on air support, I would say, after you've got 4 squadrons of Lehman Russes and 2 heavy armours. You're not going to want another battle tank squadron, or the air support is prioritised, I'd say, for that, because of its limited access within the rest of the list and its strength at the moment, at least. Yeah, I think you're going to be spending that one-off on the air support in this particular case. Finally, onto the Solar Auxilia Pioneer Company. Here you've got the HQ for giving orders, though it's less worthwhile in this one, because you've got 2 bastions and a storm section, when storm sections don't need a HQ choice to give chain of command to them to perform a charge, which will be their main order. But it is something that can go in there if you can get you another Lord Marshal into your list, which can change the orders, which is very useful. Now, the key thing about Pioneer Detachment, really, to talk about is the forward positions special rule that they get. And that gives detachments within the company entirely of infantry gain infiltrate. So that's tarantulas, rapiers, and also your Velataris storms. And that is very, very powerful for your Velataris storms. Well, all of them. It's such a brilliant rule to just be on objective first turn within buildings. You can even be in buildings that straddle your deployment zone or weird deployment zones. And it means that your tarantulas, which are normally limited by range, can be dotted about the board to really nuke enemy fighters that come in that are currently very good in the game. So you actually get one up on other people's air support by using the Pioneer Company. So we'll go into the HQ detachments. You've got the Legate Commander detachment and the Auxilia Tactical Command Detachment. Now, the difference in it is 6 points. I've used both of them to sort of try out which one I thought was, is it viable to take a Tactical Command Detachment? Because that is the main question here, I think, for the 6 points. Is it worth taking a Legate Commander? And the fact that you have Master Tactician, I would say you pretty much always want to take that 16 points. Even if all you do is want to change an order on yourself from move to first fire, that comes in your activation. So I put my Commander's Detachment on a march order and then activate them to go on to first fire, and I've not lost out by being on first fire from the start, because normally that sacrifices an activation in your move phase, where normally you want to delay to see what your opponent's doing. For 6 points, it's definitely worth that to just stick your Legate Commander, I keep calling it a Lord Marshal before, but your Legate Commander into a detachment that you know is going to want to first fire, and just change it over from March to first fire and waste one of your activations that way. It's just really useful. Now, it's also got Solar Auxilia HQ 10 inches rather than 6 inches. So basically, when we get to the chain of command rule that Las Rifle sections have, amongst others, it means that they can do more specialized orders within a further radius from your commander, rather than the Auxilia Tactical Command Detachments. Now, would I ever take a Tactical Command Detachment? Now, it wasn't bad when I did, but I do think it's worthwhile those 6 points to get the bonus 4 inches to your command rule, and also the Master Tactician. It's 16 points in like a 2,000 point game, 3,000 point game. It's a no-brainer, I would say, for that tactical Master Tactician. It even lets you put your Ogrins on charge all the time to get a bubble where people can't come into, and then change it over to a march if no one actually comes near you. And that's the difference of a 10-inch move, or 10-inch difference in the move, rather than going 5 inches if you fail your charge order. So yeah, start out with the Legate Commanders. And I don't know, if you get the feeling that you just want to use something different, that's the only reason really to go for the Tactical Command. Now, the Las Rifle Tertio, these will be seen mainly in your, God, I'm forgetting the actual name, sub-cohorts. Like, I can tell you what they do, but the specific names of these things. And that's because I've renamed all of my Solar Auxilia to fit the Iron Warriors Thoracite Auxilia. So all of mine, I think about them as different names. So you've got the Auxilia Las Rifle Tertio, starts out at 30 points for a detachment size of 4. It's a very competitive price. You've got a movement of 5 and a save of 6 up. Now, the save of 6 up means that if a building collapses, you just instantly die because of the -1 save from the building collapsing. Is that much of a downside? At the moment, I'm not seeing so much Bunker Buster, and a 6-up save on a Marine rather than having no save isn't brilliant, but it is a trade-off, because 1 or 2 bases of Marines might survive, which might capture you that objective. So it's a big downside, but in the objective capturing section of that, rather than the actual maintaining viable like damage output. You've got a close assault factor of 0. However, this will go up when you're in a building, which you pretty much always want to be. Infantry in the open is just dead, I have found, unless you've like really securely hidden it. Now, the close assault factor of Las Rifle Tertios also goes up by an additional 1 if you're in close formation fighting. And that's essentially if you're in base to base with other models in your detachment. And if you in a building, all are assumed to be in base to base contact with each other. So your close assault factor is effectively starting at 3 if you're in a building, which is comparable to a Marine's, regardless of what a Marine does. Other than like World Eaters are still better in combat, but you're on a par with Marines. So there's 0 there that you see. Don't find it too scary. Now the morale is 1 less than a Marine at 4 up. However, if you're within the Inspiring Presence range of your commander, it's a 2 up for a Legate commander. And you're mostly going to be rocking about with a commander for people that are going to be taking that much damage, like barring someone diving into your backfield and taking out your squad that's camping on the objective at the back. Your las rifles are 10-inch range, so it's slightly longer than a bolter. 5 up to hit, light, but you don't get the assault rule. So you won't be getting 2 shots at 5-inch range. Is this that much of a downside? I actually think it's medium. Because although it's good for nuking a unit that are just clutch getting some wounds onto a unit, like a couple of times I've killed 4 bases that are assaulting me with Overwatch. However, it's not that often that I would consider this a bad unit because they don't have assault or something for getting 2 shots. The damage output is reduced. However, most of the time I'm marching these around, getting them into buildings, clearing buildings. Now, the damage dealer of this unit are Flamers, which is 6-inch range, 4 up to hit, ignores cover. Not as good as Marine missile launchers with 2 shots ignores cover at 20-inch range. However, the entire unit is much cheaper, and it's just a downside of Auxilia that you'll have to offset. And we'll get onto later something that is as good as Marines at 20-inch range ignores cover. So for the upgrades, I think you want to go one of 3 ways. For something that's just going to be camping a back objective, I most likely, because I end up pinching points, I'll give another option, but when I'm going to say it, it's knowing that that will be where I pinch points from. Spamming a bunch of auxiliaries on a rear objective or having something that's not so critical. I always like to have at least 1 detachment, and this goes across all games, so 1 unit that's able to be just there. It's just a presence on the board that I'm not expecting anything from. I can just do the smart thing, capturing an objective, rather than ever expecting it to have any output whatsoever. So that's the first way, is just finishing off your points with, I'd say, minimum 8 bases, because 4 bases only needs 2 to die before it starts running away. And that is likely even if you're in a building. Next, we've got upgrading them with Flamers. So your Flamers, 12 points a model. This is something that can be done, it can be seen in 2 ways. Sprinkling in a few Flamers into your squads here and there. In my own group, we've been playing with a bunch of buildings, and it's not unlikely that some end up 6 inches from another building. So you can even flame from one building into another, or even run up right next to a building and flame, and that will allow you to hide. And I know I said infantry are dead in the open, but if you can really hide them behind line of sight blocking and flame someone out, it does work. The second way of doing flamers is in Arvus Lighters. Now, it's going to be definitely a risk, and in this game, you've got to expect everything to die. It's not a preservative game, I would say. It's a very aggressive game. Bombing in some Arvus Lighters with some flamers is very effective, because you can just burn someone's rearguard unit out that's capping their objective with your ignores cover flamers. So very effective. The third way of running them is with Velatarian Sharonite Ogryn upgrades. With that, I don't think you need a massive proportion of your las rifle tertio to be these combat upgrades, because they're very, very strong. Just a couple of them, when you're garrisoning a building, will really will stop your opponent basically from assaulting that building anywhere near as effectively, because you will basically be getting guaranteed wins with those Velatari Sharonites because of the rend rule. They've already got a close assault factor, stacking with your close formation fighting, as well as the building close assault factor. It makes them basically unkillable. Now, it also allows you to be offensive with them, because when you assault someone, I'm going to assume in a building, because that's where you need the most help clearing infantry. When you assault someone, a lot of the time I've seen Velatari Sharonites on their own dying. And you can solve that with either bulking up your squads of Velatari Sharonites with a lot more models, or you can sprinkle a few into your las rifle tertios and assault with them, so that your las rifle tertio takes the overwatch and you just pull the las rifle auxiliaries. And I think that is one of the better ways, just with the amount of times I've seen Velatari Sharonites die from overwatch to marine bolters, having done it myself a few times. So the chain of command rule means that you can only be given an advance order if you have the chain of command rule, which las rifle sections do. I've skipped ahead a page there. Which las rifle sections do. Now, that's not going to be a problem at all on your squad that's going to stay in the back and just cap an objective. However, if you want to be pushing forwards, the march order is so useful for getting into a building first turn. Moving 15 inches catapults you up the board, and it's going to be necessary in the later stages of the game to hop buildings, to get towards your opponent's deployment zone and put pressure on their objectives. It is very, very necessary, which is why the Legate Commander is so important of an upgrade for that 6 points previously, because the bubble of chain of command is bigger. Now, are you going to be doing one of those different orders every turn? I don't think so. Actually, a lot of the time I'm putting 90% of my force on advance. And the reason for that is that basically I don't want to do anything too fancy. Obviously, Velataris Sharonites, when we get to them, will be on charge orders. But I find if you do the basics right, get a few things on march to get into buildings and cap objectives, and then advance with everything, or everything else, do the movement phase right, pick your targets right in the shooting phase, or the combat phase, and stuff tends to go correctly. So next, we'll go on to the Ogrins and Sharonites themselves. Now, the difference between these two being they've got the same save, the same movement, and with only one difference in close assault factor between the Sharonites and the Velataris, I lean Velataris. Because you have rend on both the power axes and the Sharonite claws, it means rolling an extra dice when rolling for your close assault. And that giving an additional dice is essentially an additional 3 close assault factor, which is why when I was saying before, being in a building magnifies the Velataris and Sharonites effect. Now, the difference of your 1 close assault factor on a Sharonite versus a Velatari, I am much more in preference of going for more Velataris. It allows you to have an extra 2 bases if you take the Velataris by upgrading to the same points level. So you're more survivable on the way in from the Overwatch. And then your detachment is 6 rather than 4, which means 2-on-1s happen more often. And then you're rolling a further dice. So then you're on 4 dice, including your rend and your standard 2. So I'm much more in favour of the Velataris and than the Sharonites. Now, with the Velataris, you can also include them, or they've got to be included, in a Pioneer Company. And Pioneer Companies allowing them to infiltrate, get into those buildings straight away, set up charge zones as zones where your opponent can't go on the first turn, or you've set them up before the first turn, is incredibly good. It's basically no-go zones with this Velataris until those buildings are cleared. Would I, like saying that, run entire armies just of Pioneer companies? Probably not. I think you need things on back objectives like las rifle sections to be cheap. And they're going to be prime targets for bunker busters of just Kratos moving forwards and blasting your buildings. However, what it's going to do is allow you to get basically space within your movement phase where your opponent can't go. So you have these zones that you can occupy with the rest of your force. And then you're in a strong position from the movement phase of the first turn. And if you win movement phase of the first turn, you are in a very, very strong position for the rest of the game. So yeah, that's my thoughts on them. I would go with Velataris Storm. Maybe Sharonites needed an extra save or even an extra wound a base. I know the points would need to go up slightly then, but as it stands now, the Velataris Storm are just such a strong option for that amount of points. There's not much reason to take the Sharonites. So lacking the chain of command rule means that you can always perform a march or a charge order with Sharonites and Velataris. It does allow you to operate away from your Legate Commander, which is very useful. However, they both lack it, so I'd still go with the Velataris there. Next, onto the Bastion detachments. This is the Rapier and the Tarantula. As I said, the Tarantulas are magnified by Pioneer Company. We mentioned it within the Pioneer Company bit. And these are ones that aren't out yet. What I have found using, like, I've 3D printed my army, which we'll get into in a second. My rapiers that I've been using are incredibly good. Now, the ones that I've been using mainly and found to be best are the quad launchers, and that's because of the choice of shots. Having barrage with 2 dice is very good at 30 inches range for that quad mortar. It also allows a bit of a clutch situation where you can fire at tanks, although you've got light AT, so you've not got the -1 to your enemy save against tanks. It's got demolisher, so you can demolish a building. However, it's the lesser used option, I found. The key target for the quad launcher is going to be shelling any opponents that's got infantry in the open from afar, and I found them really, really good at that. The laser destroyer at 15-inch range, slightly less range obviously than the quad mortar, but 2 shots, hits on a 4 with -2 AP and is anti-tank. So obviously more specialised role infantry are getting their saves, but likely in buildings anyway, so a 4-up save. Now, I found these good. The 4-inch movement is limiting, but if you can get these up the board into a building, say, well, also Pioneer Company getting straight into buildings up the board, they are zones of anti-tank destruction. Tarantulas, much the same, but more specialised, I would say, with the anti-air. The anti-tank option on Tarantulas, when you've got things that are hitting on a 4 with -2 AP and re-rolling your saves, or your opponent re-rolling their saves, it sort of pales in insignificance, these las cannons. Whereas the laser destroyers could be in a building when they deploy and move about, which are good for the rapiers. It's a very much a downside of the Tarantula battery that you're hitting on a 5 and are immobile. So my pick there is the rapier, just getting into buildings. However, I do think you need a couple of Tarantula batteries at the current time to be anti-air threats if you've got them in a Pioneer Company. Outside of a Pioneer Company, the range of Tarantulas means that a lot of the time they'll be at the back. If your tanks have wanted to push forwards or your enemy gains air superiority, they can get round the flanks and avoid the Tarantulas, which isn't a good situation to be in and sort of invalidates them for like 14 more points it is. The rapier is just much the better option at this exact time outside of a Pioneer Company. God, that was a lengthy way of saying that I prefer rapiers. And basically, like, not sponsoring the channel, but in return for being able to use them in my army, and getting them a bit early to get them started so I could provide content to you and Legions Imperialis, that evil one has sent me some 3D print files of his new range that's coming out. I really wanted to match my 30k Solar army that I'd done. If you want to see that, there's a few battle reports on the channel, just search Solar Auxilia, or there's a painting video under the insert clickbait title for the Solar Auxilia, how I painted 240 of them in a week, or just of night times, because I was going to work in the day as well. So yeah, I wanted them to match my Solar Auxilia army. Now, luckily, that evil one is doing a Kickstarter for models to match his Lunar Auxilia, and that's under the Legions Heroicus title. I'll drop a link in the description below. So with that, you've got a range of models from Velataris with Storm Axes, Velataris with Volkite Chargers, and as you can see here with my my 28mm scale ones as well, and a bit of a zoom in so you can see the detail. Now, the detail on these is actually really lovely. Like, he's got so many little bits on there that basically I think it's more detailed than the Games Workshop models. It's got a slight benefit in that printing allows supports and doesn't have the warpage of when they've stamped the mold. I'm not going to pretend I understand the molding process, but it's just, if you've got access to a printer or the printing company, getting them from the printing companies that will be selling them after the Kickstarter's launch, I think it's a real good option. Now, it also does have the rapiers available straight away to you, and that covers the hole in the range that's currently there. If you don't like these Lunar Auxilia, which I've been using, and that's just because I wanted a traitor feel to them. Say you had an Ultramarines army and you wanted to match them, there's a Roman themed Auxilia as well. This I will actually be doing for the Ultramarines army. I just went down and painted in Swansea with Little Legend, and I'll be doing a micro scale of that army as well as these. I mean, but that's at the end of the painting list for me. But they're beautiful looking models, just scaled down versions of it and made to work of these 28mm scale models. Finally, there's a third type of infantry that's sort of a cyberpunk feel to them that looks really nice, just as a different thing for representing the breadth of all of the Solar Auxilia that is out there. Because at the moment we don't have militia. These will work perfectly for militia as well, but we don't have that breadth of models to show your distinct force. And that evil one seems to make the models that are on my mind, so it was a perfect thing when he said he was making these. So I said, oh, they're brilliant, I'd love to have them. And it was the perfect fit, already having done an army out of the Solar Auxilia there. The aesthetic of them is really strong, and the infantry is really, really nice. Now, he also does a range of tanks, of which we can see 2 here printed by a third-party printer. As you can see, they've got plasma guns range as well as the artillery that we've not yet seen rules for, but these are just miniature versions of his Basilisk and Lehman Russ collections that has the same sort of diver-like feel that Solar Auxilia have and his Lunar Auxilia have. With that little aside, let's get back onto the Solar Auxilia list. I just wanted to let people know how you could diversify the range of your Solar Auxilia. And don't forget to check out the link to the Kickstarter that's in the description below. So, the Auxilia Atheon Heavy Sentinel Patrol. Now, these actually today have just come out in 28mm scale as well. I do find them a bit derpy, and a bit too heavily derpy for me. Now, I'm going to have a chat later where I know the opposing side of that is going to be put in because the other person loves them. Now, these are where I said the Solar have the ability to rival the Marines' ignores cover missiles. And that's because of the main things in the list. You've got your multi-laser, which is 2 shots, but mainly you've got your Sentinel missile launcher, which is 2 shots at 20-inch range, 4 up to hit, ignores cover. They've also got an anti-tank option. However, being only -1 to the save, it's worth to throw in there because I suppose it's like a las cannon level. But if you're not shooting at infantry and buildings, I think you're getting into like the oops, I've done something wrong previously. You want these to be firing into infantry and buildings because those are the hardest things to dislodge. You want them firing into that every turn. Now, they've also got forward deployment, so you get a move before the first turn. Whether or not you want to move that, I found myself like half the time not doing that because the 20-inch range, movement 7, you can sort of play about with your range a bit, and I sort of want to activate these last so that I know exactly where my opponent's infantry and buildings are going to be, which ones I need to clear out, and then I can move them. So what I've been using the forward deployment for is a bit of a redeploy rather than actually moving forward. If they were range 12, yes, I'd be using that forward deployment to certainly move forwards. However, because they're range 20, I'm using it as a bit of a tactical thing while staying in a deployment zone. With a Saver 4 up, they're also much more survivable than your Solar Infantry. However, they're lacking the imperviousness to small arms that Marine Dreadnoughts seem to have. Now, how would I use these? I tend to use them in detachments of 8, and that's just because a detachment of 8 is terrifying. You can move into range of Marine heavy supports then, take some missiles, and then just blast them out of existence. With smaller units of 4, which is another size that I've been running, I've found that if I move into range, I'm going to be very lucky to survive until I get to fire. Whereas that full 8, each with 2 shots, even when it gets reduced to 4, does significant damage to Marines with missile launchers in heavy weapons detachments that might be hiding at the back. So, into the battle tanks section. So, on to Leman Russ Strike Squadrons versus Malcadors. Now, the Leman Russ Squadron is movement 8. It's got a 2-up save, and essentially it comes with 2 weapons. Either a battle cannon or vanquisher cannon, and a hull-mounted heavy bolter or las cannon. By far the better option, I think, is the vanquisher cannon. What tends to happen, I found in games, is the game is a tank engagement primarily at the start, and then tanks can move on to infantry when they're in a safer position. This tends to make me want to take, at least on Leman Russ Strike Squadrons, vanquishers, las cannons. And that's just to pack in as many high strength and armor piercing shots as I can get into my list. Once I've then got tank superiority, I can move on to other aspects like anti-infantry and firing an anti-tank weapon against something with a 5-up save. When talking about Marines, I don't think he's too bad if you're already in a strong position of having won the tank battle. So vanquishers to win that, and then mop up the infantry. Now, I don't actually think the battle cannon is in such a terrible position. It also outranges las cannons, like the vanquisher cannon does. Yes, it's not as far range as the 32-inch range of the vanquisher cannon, but it still does outrange las cannons. So if you're activating after your opponent's armor, you can stay out of range and still manage to do damage with your battle cannons. The -1 save all around, because it doesn't have anti-tank, so it does -1 save to infantry, is nice to have. So it's by no means out of the equation at all. Like, I'm going to be taking a 50-50 split in my army because it's certainly not terrible. And I don't want to do an entirely optimized army. I want variation. So I don't think it's out of the running at all. But if I'm going to give advice, the vanquisher cannon is much better. Now, the heavy bolter being point defense, now that's quite good. However, again, in the interest of winning the tank battle, las cannons, I'd say, is the way to go. We'll get further onto a point defense weapon that I think is better and more usable in the super heavy detachments. So next, we've got the Malcador. The benefits of the Malcador is that it's got an inch extra move than the Leman Russes, helping with its repositioning, an extra 2 move if you march, so if you need to clutch, get onto a point, or drive forward onto your opponent's point and claim it, get that extra slight bit of capping value on a point, this is helpful. It also has an additional wound on the Leman Russes, so it is a big tub of wounds. However, one less save I do think hurts it. And having a 2-up save against anything that is light AT or just doesn't have an AP, I think is much better than having this 3-up save. If there's no minuses involved of AP, a 2-up save is halving your amount of wounds taken. So I do think the Leman Russ is in a stronger position. It's also much less points, being only 10 points more for double the amount of tanks. So effectively in the squadron, it's the same amount of wounds for only 10 points more. That amount of points difference also means that with the double amount of Leman Russes, you're going to get more, like the same amount or more weapons in the squadron. And I don't think the weapons options on the Malcador are as good as Russes, because you're getting a las cannon on the hull. Now that's quite good. Las cannon sponsons, only one of which, I suppose, your las cannon sponson is also there. I was going to say only one of which is firing, but the profile just includes that, right? And then your cannon on top. So it's 3 weapons for essentially double the points of the Leman Russ. Do I think they're worth taking? I still think they're stronger than Marine tanks. So it will be nice to have some in the list to give that additional variation within the list. So it's definitely not down and out. However, I would be taking squadrons of Russes as the advice point. Now, how would I run either of these squadrons? These are where I'd put my tank commanders. Although some people, I've seen a lot of people actually putting them on super heavies. The wounds pool amounts within Leman Russ and Malcador squadrons is much higher, meaning that your opponent will have to go through more wounds before killing that tank commander. And this is true even for base squadrons. Like I'd have to spend 200 points on Bane Blades to equal 175 points of Russes. And then adding additional is like much cheaper for the Russes. So it becomes a much more survivable place for that tank commander that's all important for the chain of command that's on both the Malcador and the Leman Russ squadron. For my main squadron, I'd maybe be taking... I've got 8 Russes all in one squadron. The tank commander goes there. And then I've got this 16-inch move that I can motor about the board if I really need it by giving a march order. I can first fire with him, and I don't have to worry about my tank commander dying. The optimal size for your base level squadrons, I actually think is lower than that. I think it's 6 for a line squadron, I'm going to call it, where you want to stay out of range of a marine equivalent and fire with your battle cannons or vanquisher cannons. And that's because the amount of damage that you're going to do. I see lots of marine players taking 3s, and the 4 up to hits means that with a vanquisher cannon or a battle cannon, I'm going to get the same amount of hits with 6 Russes as they have in the squadron. And then if I've got a vanquisher cannon, they're re-rolling their successful saves at a -2 to their save. And that cripples a squadron. Even with a battle cannon, where they're not re-rolling successful saves, taking a marine tank's armor save down to a 4-up means that half the squadron is dying, effectively crippling that squadron, and also on average doing those morale checks that eventually your opponent will fail, and that's when you'll start spiraling and getting the upper hand. 4, I think, is a worthwhile looking. I definitely don't think it's out of it at all. You've got a good save on... Well, Malcadors are equal to marine tanks, but with double the wounds, and Leman Russes are 2-up saves. I think 4 is still a good number. If you can only fit 4 in your list, I'd definitely go for it. On to super heavy tanks, we've got the Baneblade or the Hellhammer. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I come straight down on the Baneblade side. And that's because I've used both types. The Hellhammer cannon is effectively a demolisher cannon with 2 inches longer range. Now, the main role that you can sort of see for the Hellhammer and Demolisher is attacking buildings with Demolisher. Now, I don't find they're reliable enough for how many points they are at taking down buildings. Because they lack Bunker Buster, like if a Hellhammer cannon had Bunker Buster, completely different question. However, they don't, they have Demolisher, which means my opponent is still getting their 2d6 with only a -3 rather than a -6. And I've not found it reliable in taking down buildings. If you're firing at infantry, or even other tanks, it's just 2 shots. It's basically 2 las cannon shots with a very low range. And at infantry, yes, it's got ignores cover, but it's low range, meaning I'm putting myself at risk of being in range of my opponent's tanks. So I prefer the Baneblade cannon. Yes, the Demolisher cannon, it won't be in range for a lot of the time then, but I think it's worthwhile for that 25-inch range. As the las cannon sponson turrets go, I think they're very good. You can't change them out. There's not much point in talking about them. They're las cannons. They're very good. The sponson on the side, though, because the autocannon sponsons have point defense, it means you can fire them at the start or end of your move, out of sequence effectively, and potentially do some damage to your opponent in the movement phase before they've got a chance to activate anything for firing. You can also catch people out of position, and it's better than a heavy Bolton sponson, effectively. And that's because it's additional range, it's light AT rather than light, so it can target both types of opponent. And I just prefer it as a weapon. Now, this is what I was referencing as the point defense weapon before in the Lehman Russ or Malcador bit. I can't remember which, even though it was 2 seconds ago. This is where I'd have that. And I think it makes what isn't the best tank. Yes, a Baneblade cannon is -3 AP, but it's still only 1 shot. For the amount of points that it is, I actually think without this point defense capability that the Baneblade has, the Lehman Russ or the Malcador is a much stronger choice. And I wouldn't be going too heavy into the super heavy vehicles for Solar Auxilia. I'd be sticking to the Lehman Russ and the Malcador, the bread and butters, and then having 1 or 2 of these Baneblade chassis and just completely ignore the Hellhammer, because do you know what? I'll keep trying to experiment with them, but my actual advice would be I found them to be completely useless. Winning the tank war will allow you mobility around the board, and I think that's the main sort of tactical play of Legions as I've experienced it at the moment. Infantry cowering in buildings whilst being absolutely immovable while they're in there. Tanks firing at other tanks to try and clear the board. And when you have tank superiority, your infantry can move about. Now, saying about tank superiority, we'll get into air. Now, if tanks mean that infantry have to stay in buildings, air at the moment is basically, once you've got superiority of the air, you can kill tanks with impunity. And that's because when you activate them, I always activate them last to allow me to stay out of range of my opponent's guns, because you can zip across the board. If they move forwards, it's not like I've got to move back. I'll just come on over the other side of the board. So winning the air superiority war is doable, especially with the Thunderbolt squadron. And that's because having Skyfire on a squadron that has Interceptor, whilst also having 30-inch range on Hellstrike missiles, is very good. It means I can bring my Thunderbolts onto the board. And if you want to win the air war, I'd say you want to be out activating your opponent. Because if you bring flyers on first, your Interceptor rule does nothing. Then your opponent brings their Interceptors on and has the potential of blowing you out of the sky. Getting that one-up leg on your opponent by bringing in your Thunderbolt squadron after your enemy squadron is the way to go. Now, for their points, Thunderbolts are very, very good. They've got the quad auto cannon, which is 4 dice, which is already good. They've got the twin link las cannon, which, although it's not accurate like a Marine Xiphon's is, you're already getting more shots than a Marine Xiphon. And then the Hellstrike missiles being 30-inch range just blows away basically anything else, because you can stay so far out of range of everything but vanquishers that even if you've not got superiority or you're a bit scared, you can do that with impunity. Now, for the upgrades here, upgrading to have the Avenger Bolt Cannon, I'd say is definitely worthwhile. The Avenger Bolt Cannon is the same range, it's an additional shot, the same to hit, the same AP, and basically it's the same special rules except you gain rapid fire. So if you roll a 6 when rolling to hit, you get another hit. And for 3 points, taking from 80 to 83, it's definitely a worthwhile upgrade. It's a big improvement on that autocannon, and that autocannon is already very good, I would say, at 4 shots. Next, we'll go on to the Avenger Strike Fighter Squadron. Now, this isn't one that I've actually tried out myself. On paper, though, we've got the same Hellstrike versus Sky Strike or Wing Bombs. We've got Avenger Las Cannon or Avenger Autocannon, which essentially are just one more shot. Now, on paper, the operation of this aircraft is very similar to the Thunderbolt, which is why I sort of feel a bit comfortable with talking about it. The Avenger Autocannon, the Avenger Bolt Cannon is the same as on the Thunderbolts. However, you're paying 2 more points, although it's only 2. It is what it is. The Avenger Autocannon, you get that on the wing mount versus a las cannon. And with what planes want to be doing, which is largely shooting tanks, especially to clear them at the start, I'll take the downside of anti-tank when it comes to shooting infantry, to be able to have those las cannons, which have got a 4+ to hit rather than a 5+ to hit of the autocannon, and the greater range of the las cannon, which allow me to stay out of anti-aircraft range, because most people at the moment, their anti-aircraft consist of Sakarans, which have a 16-inch range. Next, you've got a heavy stubber tail gun, which is point defense. It's light AT, so you can fire them at tanks that you've flown over, and that's most useful when you use your wing bombs. Now, your wing bombs, they're good, but they're only 2 shots, and you have to fly over your target and be in the danger zone, and I just don't think it's worth it for only 2 shots. The best use of these, again, I'd say is the Hell Strikes, which with 30-inch range comparable to the Sky, it's all comparable to the Sky Strikes. However, I think the Armour Bane on the Hell Strike missiles, the ability to shoot at ground targets much better, is better than having something that benefits you against flyers, which are already very squishy when being fired at by flyers. Like, flyers best take out flyers because they have Skyfire. I don't really need any more help with that when I've got las cannons, hell strikes, and a bolt cannon if I'm in 16. So onto the lightning, also 85 points. The movement range is really getting up there. However, I just don't think it compares to the Thunderbolt. I don't think any of these flyers are particularly bad by any means. However, I just think the Thunderbolt, as a review of the stats of the fighter, the Thunderbolt is much better. The amount of shots is decreased. The multi-laser isn't very good. You've not got the additional armament of the bolt cannon here, and it's more points. Although you've got the Phosphex bomb clusters, I just don't think it's worth trading out those Hellstrike missiles in the same way as I don't think it's worth trading out for the bomb clusters on the Avenger Strike Fighter. Next, we've got the Marauder Bomber Squadrons. Now, these are a bit of interesting choice. In the early game, I think you want to be, and this goes for all Marauders, the Marauder and the Colossus with its bomb. Let's go through them separately, actually. I was going to give a sweeping statement, but I think they are slightly different enough to be worth saying them separately. they're all very squishy at 1 wound. You've got a nose-mounted las cannon, which is very good, 22-inch range. You've got heavy bolter turrets for anything that's getting around the side. And then you've got the options of Hellstrike missiles, Sky Strikes, or Wing Bombs. Now, because you've already got the Thunderbolt for fulfilling the role of having Hellstrike missiles, it's got the same number of wounds, similar number of points. The standout feature in the Marauder is the bomb bay, and I'd add to that with the wing bombs. Essentially, how bombs work is you've got to fly over the target, and then you get the number of hits equal to the bombs on target. And at a 4+ to hit with -2 to the AP, it's good against any target. Now, what it does help you with is clearing buildings, which can be hard for Solar Auxilia, outside of charging with Velataris, buried in las rifle sections, as we said before. Now, I don't think you should be using these straight away to just zoom up the board. I have tried it once, and the Marauders are just too squishy for that. You just get shot down straight away. What I think the Marauder is to use its nose-mounted las cannon from safety. You bring it in last, or even not at all, for a couple of turns while you gain air superiority, and then you fly over troublesome buildings with your bomb bays and just pummel into oblivion everything that's down there, because I'm going to roll 7 dice against the building hitting on a 4+, and I'm going to roll 3 dice against the unit inside. Although that isn't amazingly effective, I'm really going for the building, and then hitting the inside is just a massive bonus on top of it. Now, next we have the Pathfinder, which has just got heavy bolters. And the heavy bolters on all of these are really just incidental as you fly around. It's got Hellstrike missiles or wing bombs. Again, I'd be saving them till late in the game, though there is more of something to be said for the Hellstrike missiles here, because actually why you're taking this is the Augur array. And this links up to the rapier carriages, where you've got barrage rule on your quad mortars. Now, at the moment, only linking up to that means that I don't think this is particularly valuable in taking. Essentially, only benefiting that one unit for a total of, I think it's still 85 points. It's still 85 points. I just don't think is worth the upgrade to the Pathfinder. When we start seeing more stuff like Basilisks, Medusas, maybe whatever artillery is going to come in else for Solar Auxilia, it may be worth taking. However, at this point, I don't think it is. The Colossus, we've got essentially the heavy bolters again. Again, the wing bombs and a Colossus bomb. Now, the Colossus bomb is 6 dice, 3 up to hit, -4 to a save, Bunker Buster, so you've now got Bunker Buster on something, and limited 1, which is the downside, right? Though it's going to damage a building on 2+, and with 6 dice, you're going to easily take out buildings. This, again, I would use in the same way as normal Marauders, hanging back off the board even, until you've got somewhere that's cleared of AA, or you've got air superiority from your Thunderbolts, and then you fly in and clear a building that you need to capture mid or late game. If you really need to, obviously you can bomb ground targets, but with being the only Bunker Buster access in the list currently, I'd say don't waste it unless you really, really need to. Obviously, there's no laws in the game that shouldn't be broken, or at least laws in the tactics of the game that shouldn't be broken. But I'd be very hesitant to use it against anything but a building. Finally, we've got the Marauder Destroyer. And this is, I would say, a little bit confused. You've got, as how the rules have turned out, you've got a nose-mounted autocannon array that's 16-inch range. I don't really like that because it's 16-inch range. You'll be in range of Sakarans. You've only got 1 wound, so it even only takes 1 Sakaran to take you out if you're not good at rolling 3-up saves. You've got your heavy bolter turrets as standard, which they're not why you're buying a Marauder. You've got Marauder Assault Cannon, which is 3 dice at 12-inch range. Although it will help slightly against your opponents, assault cannons, I wouldn't say good. They're not good on dreadnoughts, and it's not worth taking the destroyer for this. You've got the destroyer Bombay, which is 2 dice rather than the 3 on the normal Marauder bomber. And if you want bombs, I would go for the bomber. And that ties into the wing weapons. Again, you're looking at Hellstrike, Skyscrapes, wing bombs. If you want to go bombing, take the Marauder bomber. And then I'd say that the 6 dice with an autocannon just doesn't outweigh having las cannons early game, and because it doesn't help you with your ability to go on bombing runs. And just say, sadly, it doesn't work over having a Thunderbolt, say. Finally, we're into the Arvus Lighter. Now, as it can transport 2 infantry stands, has hover, so it can drop them off, obviously, 25-inch range, and really for that, I think that it is very useful. It's useful in clutch situations. It's useful for depositing flamer teams, as I said before, in your Solar Auxilia infantry company. Is it the greatest transport ever? No, it's not like a Thunderhawk with 2 wounds. Are you cheap and is it cheap? Yes. Now, I've seen floating about online that like first turn you should fly them all across the board and like drop off a unit, then charge something in combat the next turn. And I'd say if you can pull it off, good, but with the low amount of wounds, it's only 25-inch move, remember, so it's going to potentially take you a couple of turns to get to your intended target. I'd actually say a bit of a flamer drop in the back is good, because the flamers are going to kill whatever's in the building. Other than that, I'd say you really want to just fly around with a las rifle section. You keep it incredibly cheap for that detachment and that transport option. You fly around and you just allow that las rifle section to be inserted into the backfield when it's safe. You take an objective that you previously wouldn't have been able to get because at the point your armies are engaged, you might not be able to sneak something through on foot. And at the moment, we don't have any transports for Solar. And that is my thoughts on all the units in the list. If you liked this video, or you've got something to add, maybe I've missed something, or there's some tactics that you found successful, do let me know in the comments. It's helpful for me, as well as any other players playing Solar Auxilia. If you liked watching the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It does help, and it helps me prioritize these videos when I'm looking at what videos I should make next. And there is a Patreon link below where you can get yourself ad-free videos, early access to the videos, the ability to listen to these in podcast format, because Patrons have access to the podcast RSS feed, as well as access to the Discord and DICE. And with that, I'll see you next time in a bit.